So, welcome all of you. Let's discuss the newspaper and the important articles. So, the first article is about government deep tech fund, rupees 2192 crore cleared. 62% goes to firm linked to panel that chooses them. So, basically, government has created a fund called Deep Tech Fund. Now, this fund will be used to basically fund those companies which are basically working with cutting edge technologies. We'll see about what kind of technologies we are talking about. So the fund is of around 2,192 crore, but some issue has come that it has been observed that 62% of the fund have gone to those companies which have basically some link to the selection committee. So to distribute this fund 2192 crore, a selection committee was created. Now it has been observed that 62% of the companies have some link, some association with the members of the selection committee. So it raises question regarding the transparency and the impartiality with which the fund was basically distributed among the companies. So just to try to we'll try to read the news again. So it says a new public fund to boost India's deep tech ambitions in the private sector has been approved. In its first round, 2,192 crore in soft loans to 22 private companies at the. So, first of all, the term is soft loan. Now, what is a soft loan? See, soft loan is a loan which is given at a very lowest interest rate. These are called soft loans. There are two kinds of loans. One is the hard loan, which is given at a high interest rate, and then soft loan given at a very low interest rate, basically to enable this company to grow themselves in the coming time. So what kind of companies are being given this kind of loan? So companies which are working with at the cutting edge of space technology, energy technology, pharma technology. So mostly these are the companies who have been given this soft loan, and the total worth of this soft loan is 2192 crore. So these companies were chosen from 124 applicant by a 12-member panel, including 11 established name in private equity and technology and non-voting government representatives. So there were 124 applicant. There were 124 applicant for this soft loan, out of which so these applicants they were out of which 124, 22 were selected. So to select these 22 companies, there was a 12-member selection committee. There was a 12-member selection committee. Now, so so there was an investigation regarding this selection committee. So it has been found that out of 22, 15 have investment ties to 7 members of the selection committee, raising questions of conflict of interest and propriety. So basically, out of 22, 15 companies were such companies who have some kind of association with the members of the selection committee. Now, this raises a question about conflict of interest. Okay, so these 15 companies together they received 1,377 crore rupees of soft loan out of total of 2192 crore. So 1377 crore went to 15 companies, and these 15 companies had some kind of association with the members of the selection committee. Now, 9 of the firms are linked to the chairman of the selection panel, the founder of an angel investing network, who also has a personal stake in at least one of the companies selected. So, out of this 15, 9 companies were such who had some association with, in fact, the chairman of the selection committee. Basically, the chairman was working as an angel investor in these companies, and in fact, in one of these companies, the chairman was directly linked. The members are part of the investment committee of the Technology Development Board, one of the two organizations under the Ministry of Science and Technology. So basically, this entire funding was taken was basically coordinated by a board called Technology Development Board. Now, this Technology Development Board is an organization under Ministry of Science. Organization under Ministry of Science. So this Technology Development Board, it has a investment committee. It has an investment committee, and this investment committee was basically overlooking the distribution of this deep tech fund among the applicant companies. So there were 124 companies, out of which 22 were selected, and this was selected by this investment committee of the Technology Development Board, which comes under the Ministry of Science and Technology. Now, if you look at the names of the company which have been selected, so they are Nokorak Robotics, so it is from the medical field, medical technology. Endure Air System, it is from the advanced manufacturing technology. ETRNL Energy, it is from the energy sector. Dhruva Space, we got to know the name very recently. Dhruva Space was the company which basically launched India's first private rocket. Dhruva Space. Then there is a big Indian, it's a semiconductor firm. Astrom Technology, it's a space technology company. Pepris Technology, it's a pharma company. Surgeon Mediproduct, again a medical company. And Manastu Space Technology, again related to space. Now these nine companies, they are basically related to the chairman of this committee, which was whose name is Mr. Saurabh Srivastava. Now, Mr. Saurabh Srivastava, he is the former chairman of NASCOM, and also the co-founder of Indian Angel Network. So these companies have direct link with Saurabh Srivastava. Then there's another member of this basically of this selection committee whose name is Mr. KRS Jamwal. Now he is also associated with other companies like Nokorak Robotics, Endure Air System, Tejas Network, Big Indian, Peptris Technology, Think Metal, Manasu Space. Okay. Then there are different members who have some association with these 15 companies. Okay. Now taking forward this news, so when these members were contacted, so they denied the allegations, saying that they had in advance communicated the government about their association with these companies, and they had basically recused in the case of these companies. So whenever the matter of these companies came up, these members had recused themselves. However, this issue was flagged in Parliament by Congress Rajya Sabha MP Praveen Chakrabarti. In a written reply submitted on July 30, Science and Technology Minister Jitendra Singh listed the names of the seven members who had disclosed financial interest in the company. So this question came up in the Rajya Sabha. So it was an unstarred question. It was an unstarred question. So basically, we know that in Rajya Sabha there are three kinds of question: starred questions, unstarred questions, and short duration questions. So basically, start questions are those questions which require oral reply from the minister. To reply an oral reply from the minister, and as such, as it requires an oral reply, therefore supplementary or follow-up questions can be asked. Now, then there are unstarred questions which require a written reply from the minister. So, as it is a written reply, so that's why follow-up questions cannot be asked. Then there are short duration questions which are asked by giving a very short notice, maybe less than 10 days. So in this case, this particular question was an unstarred question, means it required a written reply from the minister. So, since it was not specifically asked, the Union Minister's reply did not detail the nature of or extent of the investment. The next day, Department of Science and Technology clarified that the selection were done purely on merit and there was zero involvement of any conflicted members during the evaluation or sanction process of the concerned proposal. So basically, the ministry has denied any allegation of any conflict of interest, saying that everything was done in a transparent manner. So the MP who had raised this question, he said that the committee to fund R&D in deep tech can comprise mainly of scientists, academics, and others with no profit indulgence. Commercial viability and financial evaluation can also always be received from experts external to the committee. He basically said that the committee should consist only of people who belong to science or from the field of academics, and any person who do not have any association with any commercial association. And when asked then how to evaluate the financial viability of the company, he said that these information can be taken from external experts and who will not be part of the selection committee. So this was the case. So basically, you have to know here is the kind of questions: start questions, unstart questions, short duration questions. We have to also know about the Technology Development Board of India (TDB), which works under Department of Science and Technology. and the this deep tech fund created by the government of India. Okay, so let's move to the next news now. So the next news is regarding UP headmistress suspended as video shows poor midday meal. So after a video showing watery vegetable curry being served to students during the midday meal at a primary school in Uttar Pradesh, Sitapur district went viral on social media. The education department on Wednesday suspended the school's headmistress and terminated the service of the cook. The video purportedly showed chunks of potato floating in watery curry ladled onto the children's plate. Rotis handed out to the children fell on the floor before one child picked one up and put it back on his plate. Sitapur District Magistrate Dr. Raja Ganapati R and Basic Shiksha Adhikari Gorakhnath Patel said in a statement that the block education officer BEO Udaymani Patel, who is immediate supervising officer for the primary schools in the block, was also held responsible. An adverse entry was made in his service record. So basically, what is this midday meal? Midday meal. So we'll talk about midday meal. So midday meal was a provision under the Right to Education Act 2009. Right to Education Act 2009. So we know that by the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act. By the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, Article 21 capital A was added in the Constitution of India. Now, this Article 21 capital A gave basically fundamental right to education. It says that every child between the age of 6 to 14 years will have a fundamental right to education. Now, earlier this was part of Article 45 of the Constitution. So before 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, Article 45 of the Constitution, it used to say that it is the responsibility of the state to provide basically a compulsory education to all children between the age of 6 to 14 years. However, as it was part of Article 45, and we know that Article 45 comes under Part 4 of the Constitution, which is basically DPSP, Directive Principle of State Policy. Now, these are just directives and non justiciable in nature. So, this was not compulsory for the government to provide. So, that's why the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act was brought, by which this provision of Article 45 was shifted to a new article called Article 21 capital A. And now, Article 45 basically talks about the education and early childhood care to all children below the age of 6 years. Below the age of 6 years. Now, providing education and early childhood care to children below the age of 6 years is a DPSP, which is non-justiciable in nature, but still government has taken out many schemes like the Anganwadi scheme to basically fulfill this DPSP. Now, 86th Constitutional Amendment Act also amended Article 51 capital A, which is the fundamental duty. So, a new fundamental duty was added, basically the duty of the parents to basically send their children to school. So this was done by 86th Constitutional Amendment Act and Article 21 capital A was added. Now to implement the Article 21 capital A, Government of India passed Right to Education Act 2009. Now we know that education basically is a part of the concurrent list of Schedule 7. Now our Constitution is Schedule 7. Now Schedule 7 basically divides the legislative power of the center and the state government. Now, Schedule 7 has three lists. First is the central list, then we have the state list, and then we have something called the concurrent list. Now, central list consists of the subjects on which only the Parliament of India can make law. State list consists of the subjects on which both the Parliament and on which only the state legislative assembly can make law. And the concurrent list, it consists of only the subjects on which both the central Parliament and the state legislative assembly both can make law. Now, there is also a clause that what if both Parliament and the State Assembly makes a law on a subject mentioned in the concurrent list. So, the Constitution says if such thing happen, the law made by the Parliament shall prevail, except for if the state law had received the assent of the President of India. In that case, the state law will prevail. We know that under Article 201 of the Constitution, the governor has the right to reserve certain state bills for the consideration of the President. So, if this was the case, if the bill was reserved for the consideration of the president and president has given her assent on that state law, in that case the law made by the state will prevail. However, the parliament will have the right to override that law later. Okay, so now this is the basically your schedule 7. Now education as a subject initially was under the state list. Initially was under the state list. But by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, education was transferred from the state list to the concurrent list. Means now both state and center, basically parliament and the state assembly, both can make law on the subjects mentioned in the concurrent list. Now, so based on this, the Parliament passed the Right to Education Act 2009. Now, this act says that act has three major provisions. First of all, it says that every children between the age of 6 to 14 will have the right to free and compulsory education, and for this, in every 1 square kilometer area, one school, primary, secondary school, upper primary school needs to be constructed by the government. Second, it talks about that midday meal should be provided to children who attend these schools. Now midday meal is a very successful idea because it has been able to basically attract poor children to school. The parents are also relaxed that their children, for example, you can imagine like parents who are daily wage laborers. So earlier they were worried. So when they are away for work, how will their children eat? Now, because of this midday meal, they send their children to school and they are satisfied that their children will get food. So now midday meal becomes a very important attractive point for children coming from poor background to schools. So we need to ensure good quality of food being provided or being served under the midday meal. But this case here shows that the quality was not being maintained, and as such, the mistress of that school, she was suspended by the district authorities. So this is the news. Let's go to the next news now. So the next news is regarding a Supreme Court case regarding giving creamy layer provision for reservation given to SC and ST community. Now this creamy layer provision first came into existence in a very important case called the Indira Shawni case. Now, this Indira Shawni case was regarding OBC reservation. So, when a petition was filed against the reservation which was granted to the OBC community in the Indira Shawni case, Supreme Court said or basically introduced the concept of creamy layer, by which the reservation under OBC shall be available only to those people whose income is less than 8 lakh rupees per annum. 8 lakh rupees per annum. So this was the concept of creamy layer. Now there have been demand that this creamy layer concept should also be introduced in reservation for SC and ST community. Now it has been contended that the only few community within the SC and ST community are reaping of the benefit of the reservation, while majority of the community are still lying backward. So that's why this concept of creamy layer was supposed to be introduced. Now, central government, when asked whether this should be done or not, first of all, they said that any decision, if required to be taken, whether creamy layer concept should be introduced for SC and ST or not, should be taken only by the Parliament and not by the Supreme Court of India. It should be a parliamentary decision and not Supreme Court decision. For this, the central government basically cited a judgment in the E.V. Chinnaiya versus State of Andhra Pradesh case and held that whenever a situation arises from the exclusion of creamy layer from SCs, it will be Parliament alone to take the necessary legislative step in terms of Clause 2 of Article 341 of the Constitution. So this was center's stance, basically asking the Supreme Court to refrain from passing any judgment regarding inclusion of the concept of creamy layer for SC or ST community. Now, again, defending the concept that why a creamy layer should not be introduced for SC and ST community, the center says that the country's reservation policy is based not solely on economic status but on historical and social criteria like caste, tribe, social backwardness. So basically, they said that the reservation was not solely given for economic upgradation. It was an overall concept whereby an upgradation in all spheres like the social upgradation, educational upgradation, and basically your caste upgradation, so everything. So it was given on the basis of socially and education backwardness and not on the concept of economic backwardness backwardness. That's why seeking creamy layer concept for SC and ST community is not a punitive idea. It's not a very prudent idea. Why? Because see, economy is not the only criteria to give reservation. Even if someone is economically now well developed, does not mean that the social or educational backwardness has gone away. So that's why center contended that this should not be given. And the center also said that in majority of the schemes of welfare and development, SCs, STs, and socially and educationally backward classes expecting reservation in educational institutions and reservation in services under the state, there are means to ensure that benefits of schemes percolate to those who actually deserve them. So the central government clarified that there are actually means available by which it is ensured that the benefits of the scheme are given to only those who actually deserve them, and not to those who are not deserving. The government says that the scheduled caste have faced historical disadvantage from untouchability, while the scheduled tribe they exhibit distinct culture, geographical isolation, and backwardness. Talking about the OBC, who are legally called socially and educationally backward classes, they are identified by social and educational and economic disadvantages along with a lack of representation in service. So, see, for OBCs, economic disadvantage is the criteria. So that's why for them the creamy layer concept was introduced. However, reservation was given to people belonging to SC community or ST community, not based on economic criteria, but rather for SC it was said that they have faced historical disadvantage in the form of untouchability, while people from scheduled tribe community they exhibit a distinct culture, geographical isolation, and backwardness. So that's why center basically opposed the idea of extending the concept of creamy layer for reservations granted to SC and ST community. And the center also said if any such thing has to be done, it has to be done by the Parliament of India and not by the Supreme Court. Basically asking the Supreme Court to refrain from any such activity. Now what will be the final judgment of the Supreme Court? That has to be seen. Okay. So the next news we will say about the meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee and what were the outcomes. See, what is this Monetary Policy Committee? See, Monetary Policy Committee is the apex committee basically which decides the policy rates of the India. So policy rate means basically repo rate, and the rates which are associated with it, like reverse repo, bank rate, etc., MSF, CRR, and other rates. So, what is repo rate? See, repo rate basically means repurchasing obligation. Repo rate is the rate at which RBI lends loan to scheduled commercial banks in India. To scheduled commercial banks in India. So, if the repo rate is high, if the repo rate, let's say repo rate is 10%, so the scheduled commercial bank will further give loan to the customers below at a rate higher than this, 11%, or let's say 12%, because they also need to make the profit. So if the repo rate is let's say reduced to 9%, then what will happen? They are also expected to decrease their basically the interest rate at which they give the loan to the customers below. So basically, repo rate decides the cost of the loan, whether the loan will be expensive or loan will be basically your cheaper. So that is more or less decided by the repo rate. We can say majorly, not completely, but yeah, majorly. Repo rate is a major factor behind determination of the policy rates. Now, what happens? So when the loans are costlier, so lesser people demand loan. Lesser people, suppose I have to buy a bike. So of course, everyone in India, they don't buy bike by paying the full amount. We take bike loan or car loan, something like that. So if the loan rate is high, what will happen? I will basically delay my program of buying the bike. So when the loan rates are high, demand goes down. Demand goes down, and we know that when demand goes down, inflation also goes down. So if the inflation in the market is high, in that case the MPC, which is the body responsible for basically determining these policy rates, they will increase the repo rate. So repo rate is increased in order to fight basically your inflation. But what if the inflation is under control, and the basically the agenda of the government or the intention of the government is to boost growth. So how growth will can be boosted? Suppose I decrease this repo rate to 1%. Now the loan becomes very cheap. So if the loan becomes very cheap, more and more people will be intended to buy things which they were delaying now. So more demand will increase. So demand will increase, it will lead to more manufacturing. More manufacturing will lead to more job creation. More job creation will further lead to more demand, because these jobs which will be created, they will receive salary and they will basically spend their salary in buying products. So it's a virtuous cycle. It's a virtuous cycle. So there are two things. Increasing policy rates, repo rate, is used to basically curtail inflation, while decreasing policy rate is used to basically boost demand. Now, what is the, see, when MPC was created, see, MPC, Monetary Policy Committee, it was not tasked basically with demand boosting and all. The only mandate it was given was to basically fight inflation, was to fight inflation. So the MPC, it was given a target to maintain the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index inflation, at around 4% plus minus 2%, matlab between 2 to 6%. So it was tasked that the MPC should basically try to maintain the CPI, which is your Consumer Price Index, between 2 to 6%. If the inflation goes beyond 6%, then the MPC will will increase the policy rate to fight the basically your inflation. And if the inflation goes below 2%, then they will decrease. So if the inflation is going below 2%, means that there is no demand. There is no demand. So in order to boost the demand, they will decrease the policy rates. So every quarter, this Monetary Policy Committee, which is basically chaired by the governor of RBI, they determine the policy rate. So this quarter's policy rate was determined, and let's see what happened. So it says that the RBI Monetary Policy Committee left the policy rate unchanged and retained its neutral stance in the August meeting. Means the Monetary Policy Committee, they have not changed the policy rates. Means they think that the situation is under control. Neither we need to decrease it nor we need to increase it. Whatever is continuing, let it be continued. The tone of the policy, however, was more dovish than expected, with the risk of food inflation. Dovish matlab a tendency to basically increase the policy rate. And why it was the tone was like that? Because of the risk of food inflation, rising and volatile crude oil prices, we expect central bank's tone to be more cautious. So because we expect the inflation to rise in the coming time because of the ongoing war, because of which the crude oil prices have risen. So till now, the government of India was able to manage this scarcity because of the reserves which we had. But if the war continues longer, so there will be an impact on the Indian economy. So that's why the tone was very cautious. The RBI highlighted that while CPI inflation is rising, it is mainly because of the higher food and fuel prices. CPI inflation has increased steadily to 4.4% in June from 2.7% at the beginning of the year. So the current CPI is 4.4%, which was only around 2.7% at the beginning of this year. And the main reason for this rising inflation is the rising food prices. Floods and all are coming, which is destroying crops, and the food which we were importing, that their prices are also rising eventually because of the rise in the fuel cost. Because of the rise in the fuel cost. So, however, with high input cost inflation, core inflation, excluding food and fuel, has remained relatively lower. So, what is core inflation? If you decrease the inflation caused by fuel and food, the remaining inflation is called core inflation. So, the RBI or the Monetary Policy Committee said that the core inflation is stable. In fact, core inflation, excluding precious metals, which reflects demand side inflation, is at the benign 2.4%. So the demand is very so core inflation, from which if you if you remove the precious metal like gold and other, they are precious metals. So other demands, other inflation is very stable at around 2.4%, showing a moderate demand. The central bank has marginally lowered the average CPI projection for financial year 27 to 5%, while highlighting that so far supply side inflationary pressure has not become broad based. However, volatile global crude oil price and weak monsoon remains inflationary risk. So there are two factors behind inflation. One is called the demand side inflation, and the other is called the supply side inflation. See, if people start demanding a particular product more, okay, and the supply is constant, so in that case, the demand will exceed the supply, and the inflation will happen. This is called demand side inflation. Let's say there is only 100 kg supply of onion, and there are 1,000 buyers. So in that case, so demand is more, supply is less. So eventually, what the shopkeeper will do, he will raise the price. Price. This is called the market balancing of the price. Then second inflation is supply side inflation. Let's say demand remains constant, but there is a decrease in supply. So that if then the inflation happens, this is called supply side information inflation. So right now the RBI has projected that the major inflation which is happening is because of the supply side. Why? Because of the rising global crude oil prices, and we know that this year is an El Nino year. El Nino year happens every 3 or 4 years. Whenever El Nino happens, we see basically a decline in the monsoon rainfall. So because of the El Nino year, we may also witness a lower basically production of food crops. So that may also lead to inflation in the coming financial year. That's why the Monetary Policy Committee has projected inflation for the next financial year at around 6.7%. High frequency macro indicators like IIP, ISP, and your core sector, bank credit demand, and export growth have been quite robust. So these parameters are under control. The corporate performance in the first quarter is also looking healthy based on the healthy data so far. Growth in the first quarter is likely to be strong at around 7%. So the Monetary Policy Committee, they have also projected in the first quarter of 2026-27 the GDP growth will be around 7% compared to the first quarter of 2025-26. However, there will be some moderation in the subsequent quarters as the economy begins to feel the adverse impact of the West Asia crisis. So, as I have said, till now the major impact of the West Asia crisis has not been felt because of the reserves of crude oil which we already have. So, but if the war continues further, the impact may be felt, and there may be a downslide in the GDP growth. Okay, the progress of the monsoon and the subsequent impact on the agriculture sector and rural demand is another important factor to watch. So, how much there will be decline in monsoon rainfall and how this decline will impact the agricultural produce, that may also be a deciding factor. India's external sector has been managing well in the midst of the volatile global environment. After a weak financial year 26, India's good exports have picked up by a strong 16% in the quarter 1 FY27. So very good news that our exports have risen by 21%. It's not a very small 16%, sorry, which is not a very small number. And it's not just because of high crude of oil prices, as experts excluding petroleum products have also recorded a strong growth of 13% in this period. So even the items which do not use crude oil, for example, we also export refined oil. So if refined petroleum. So refined petroleum, it requires crude oil as the raw material. If the price of crude oil is increasing, so ultimately the price of refined petroleum products will also increase. But we are not seeing that. If you remove all the items which do not require crude oil, even then our growth is 13% in the export growth. Overall, the balance of payment is likely to move to a large surplus in FY27 from deficit recorded in the previous 2 years. This should be supportive of the Indian rupee, but we will have to closely watch the policy action of other major central banks globally. So, we are expecting a major surplus in our balance of payment. In the last 2 years, there has been a decline. Now, we are expecting a major surplus, and if the balance of payment is in huge surplus, means we will have large amount of foreign exchange compared to the last year. So, we may expect a stronger rupee also. So, this is the news regarding this Monetary Policy Committee report for this quarter. So, that's all for today's analysis. Thank you very much.